Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
So pleased to welcome you all here today for including two of my beautiful ex-students from Binghamton University who almost made me cry just seeing them. I'm pleased to welcome you here for this wonderful, to celebrate the publication of this wonderful anthology, What's Your Exit? A literary detour through New Jersey. It's such a clever idea, and it was the brainchild of Joe Valisi and Alicia Beal, and I'm going to just read a little bit about each one of them, and then I'm going to ask them to come up and call up the readers for this anthology. Alicia is the former coordinator of the NYU KGB Emerging Writers Reading Series. Being an emerging writer herself, she's incredibly excited to have co-edited What's Your Exit? More importantly, she is a shore girl and grew up in Long Branch, New Jersey. She believes Central New Jersey does exist. So do I, Alicia. Joe Valisi grew up in Palisades Park, New Jersey, which is neither the location of the Palisades nor the historic, long-defunct amusement park. It's not so long defunct, you make me feel ancient. It's defunct. He received his BA in creative writing and MA in teaching literature from Bard College and earned his MFA from New York University, where I also have a degree, where he is currently language lecturer in the expository writing program. His writing has appeared in North American Review, Via, Voices in Italian Americana, and Field Notes. He lives in Brooklyn, New York, and I think these two young people are really to be commended for having done such a beautiful job on this anthology. Let's welcome a nice round of applause. They're the young people.
Oh, I think you stole the badge.
Well, thank you, Maria. That was a wonderful introduction, and I'm actually very touched. Thank you.
Yes, and our publisher, Jackie Corley, is not here today, but we want to always thank her because she believed in the book from the very start. She believed in the book from the very start, and when bigger presses and book agents were trying to sex up the anthology, whatever that meant, and turn it into something that it wasn't going to be, as far as we were concerned, she really stepped in and said, I believe in what you're doing, and we're going to do it, and we're going to make it happen. So she's not here, but a round of applause for her. For all small presses. Jackie Corley is her name.
Wonderful. The book is beautiful.
It is beautiful. We did a fantastic job. I'm very proud of it.
So we also should thank David Barringer, our designer, as well as Jer's cousin, Laura Mulisi, who did the photography for the anthology.
That's the design and cover art.
Yes.
Great. And just a few words also about the terrible. We consider it a huge tragedy what's going on in terms of education in schools and libraries in New Jersey right now. So we promised that every reading we would take a moment to thank all the libraries who are purchasing this book in droves. Last we checked, I believe 200 libraries in New Jersey had placed orders for the anthology, which seems like a wonderful, quiet solidarity in a time when they might not even have the internet for free anymore. So we really appreciate that, and we value that, and we keep those libraries in mind. And just a few quick words about how the anthology came to be. We were both receiving our MFA.
At NYU, Joe and I were in the same workshop, and our writing had a lot of the essence of New Jersey. We were finding different things about our writing that we could connect to as people from Jersey. And the most interesting thing was that during one workshop class, our professor, we can try to tell the story a bit better.
stopped and asked, okay, so everybody, tell me where you're from and tell me the last great book that you read. I forget what I think I said A Three Dog Life or something. I said, I'm from New Jersey. But I always did it with little of that because you're sort of told that you should by society. And he stopped and he said, oh, I can do you one better. I'm from Long Island. And everybody started laughing. And I just stopped and said, hey, I like being from New Jersey. And everybody kind of stopped, like, why? He's getting angry. He is from New Jersey, And then across the room, she smiles and she raises her hand and says, hi, I'm Alicia, and I'm also from New Jersey.
Yes.
And I love it too. And then we sort of had this...
it's like a Jersey bond.
This bond that happened. And from that point on, we were sort of always giving each other these extra critiques and feedback that was very specific to this spirit of the state that we just didn't feel anybody else could really grasp if they weren't from there, and nobody else was from there. And so we sometimes say, disregard this, everybody else, but, you should look at this, Alicia, because I don't remember that that doesn't ring true to me. And so there was a lot of that wonderful sort of underlying care that we could do with each other's writing.
And that's what the interesting thing about our anthology is, that everyone has a different New Jersey, but there's something about it that we all share. And as you read for the anthology, and as you'll listen to today, that everyone's New Jersey is a little different. Some people's New Jersey is a little, it's on the shore, it's up north, where there's bears, which I didn't grow up with. I grew up with sand, surf, and sun. And some people's New Jersey, it's down south. So when they say the city, they mean Philadelphia, where so many of us mean New York. But there's something about New Jersey, about the neighborhoods, about the people, about saying coffee, that creates a bond with us that we can all recognize when we're reading, which will happen with Joe and I, and which we hope you'll find in our anthology.
And especially during this time, this is the last thing I'll say, during this strange time in which New Jersey has been elevated in the pop culture status in what should be a positive, but instead it's, Jersey Couture and Jerseylicious and Jersey Shore and the Real Housewives of New Jersey, and I'm sure we've all turned them on and we can laugh at them a little bit, but that sort of started saying, wait, we can't let, The Sopranos ending be the end of New Jersey taken seriously. And that's what started the conversation, and we said, no travel guide, no coffee table book with Martha Stewart's house, and somebody suggested that we do that. None of that. We said we want literary fiction, poetry, and strong essays that are happening now that are telling people, yes, Jersey is some of those things, but it's also hugely this thing. And I think we accomplished it. We're very happy about it. So without any more of this sentimental rambling, because we're so touched by truly every event we have, we'll start calling up some of our readers. We'll begin with Laura Boss. And Laura Boss is the founder and editor of Lips, National Poetry Magazine, and co-editor of New Jersey Poetry Calendar. She has won many prestigious prizes for her work and has judged the Patterson Fiction Prize, the Ginsberg Poetry Awards, and the Patterson Students Poetry Contest. She is taught at Fairleigh Dickinson as well as at the Jersey School of the Arts, Montclair State University. She has been conducting poetry workshops in the Patterson Public Schools since 1991 through the present, and was a Geraldine R. Dodge Poet in the Schools. She has conducted numerous workshops for both children and adults since 1987. Please welcome Laura Boss. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much, Alicia and Joe and Maria, for hosting this today, and for all of you who came out. I just want to say that years ago there was an article in the Star Ledger, and they called me, it was one of those, Poet of the Month or Poet of the Week in April, and they called me a Jersey girl, and I was really pleased about that. And I'm from central New Jersey. Nothing's more central than Perth Amboy and Woodbridge and Claybanks. But the poem I have in the anthology, which is the one I'll begin with, is a poem that was in the New York Times, and For me, there are two things in New Jersey. I'm sure there are more, but I always think about. One is walking the boards, and the other one is diners. And after every poetry reading every workshop, somehow we would wind up at a diner. And none of us had big budgets, but we always had our scrambled eggs, hash browns, rye bread toast. Anyway, so this is a poem from that, and then I'll read this. Okay. New Jersey diners. Somehow they were where we always gathered late at night, growing up, after proms, after movies, after weddings, even after funerals. We would sit in red plastic booths holding menus with $400 with 400 items and 18 customers in the diner. We would sit in the Claremont in Verona or the Wequahic in Newark, both known for the best cheesecake in New Jersey, the Rio Diner in Woodbridge, the Tic-Tac on Route 3. You probably had your own favorite with its Formica counters and inexpensive scrambled eggs with hash browns, the smell of coffee as familiar as those diners that dotted the landscape of the highway, that dotted the landscape of memory. So it's a poem. And I'm going to read a poem from my new book, Flashlight, and I think I'll change my reading. I'm going to read something a little shorter. This is called My Refrigerator Talks to Me. Look at me. You've put all these family photos up covering my black and steel door. You're on a diet. Your usual start Monday morning, off Tuesday morning. I'm feeling empty and alone with only ice cubes in the freezer section and one solitary pint of cookie dough ice cream, which I know you'll devour after the 11 o'clock news Tuesday night. Inside me, you have only Diet Pepsi and some cream cheese. I am lonely. I miss your opening and closing my door every couple of hours when you're home to grab some leftover pasta or orange juice or cream cheese for your bagel. You pass me by and don't see the real me. Sometimes you smile at the family photos that cover the real me. Look at me. Put your hands on my door handle. Open me up. Fill me with cantaloupes, avocados, half and half, meatloaf, and peach pie. Visit me often. Put your hands inside me again. Maybe I'll try and get this poem in. This is a poem takes place near the Caldwell Airport, Fairfield, and I wrote this poem after hearing the news of JFK Jr.'s plane crash. Airborne, listening to the reports of JFK Jr.'s plane missing after leaving Caldwell Airport. Years ago at Caldwell Airport, I left in a tiny plane my 16-year-old was piloting. The two of us in this one-engine, seemingly paper plane he had pushed back with one hand while checking it before we left. I did not want to be in this plane, but it was just after I had separated from his father, and my guilt was making me try to please the son I had so displeased by leaving his father. The guy I was going with at the time had put his gold cross around my neck and was crying as we left, though his fear would not let him come up with us. My son said I was brave. All his friends who had come up with him were either screaming or throwing up at this point in the trip. We circled over New York City. We headed up to Maine, where my older son was going to school. There was no control tower person, but my son landed after a few more circles. Coming back from Maine that night, my son told me to scan the horizon for planes too near to us. He told me I was right. He shouldn't be flying at night, that everything looked the same at night. He had me hold the map, which he circled with his flashlight, trying to find out exactly where we were. I asked him if he had another battery for his flashlight or even another flashlight. He said no. I told him I'd buy another flashlight when we got back. He told me if for any reason he passes out or hits his head, I should click on a center radio station and they tell me how to fly the plane in. When we finally land, I ask him if his father has ever gone up with him. No, he replies. He says he's not ready. I'm not ready either, I tell myself, and I also think that my former husband is smarter than I thought he was. But I also think how women try to please males, to so often do things they don't want to do, just to please a man, whether it be family or a lover. And I think how Carolyn Bessette, who according to the News and Family reports did not want JFK Jr. to fly his own plane, and how she and even her older sister tried to please him, to show him that they did believe in him by climbing into that private plane. And I know how lucky I was when I got off that small one-engine plane at Caldwell Airport so many years ago. And I think how unlucky those other women were when leaving Caldwell Airport Friday night, that good intentions, guilt, and yes, even love cannot always keep one airborne. And I think I'll finish with a poem from my book Arms called Matching Urns. I think how 3 weeks ago before surgery, I thought as I cleaned my apartment in case I didn't make it, so my mother wouldn't have a stroke when she saw my place, how one of the first things my first husband's second wife did after their marriage was to get 2 places in a mausoleum so they would be together forever. Though in the traditional Jewish religion, I'm still married to him since we never had a Jewish divorce, just the usual civil one. And I think how I don't have a place to be buried, no plot way out in Long Island by my grandparents, no plot nearer in Queens where my father and his parents and his sisters are buried, with only room left for my mother. What a pain for my kids at the time of grieving to have to find some plot of dirt to dig me into. How civilized if I am cremated and save them the time and effort as well as cemetery trip, lights on all the cars way out to Long Island, but the air conditioner's probably off since the cars are overheating from the 10-mile-an-hour funeral procession. No, perhaps a plot closer to their apartments, but then so costly for them. Yes, better and cheaper to be burnt up and my ashes given to them in a tasteful urn in brown clay, or perhaps pink enamel with little rosebuds with daisies if they want to spring for it, to be placed on a mantle. But whose mantle? Will my 2 sons fight over who will get my ashes? Will the fight be over who has to keep this depressing urn on their mantle? Neither has a mantle. And how will their wives feel to have their mother-in-law forever parked in their living room, seeing the dust or unvacuumed floors, a constant recrimination to them, though she was never a housekeeper? And perhaps my lover of 10 years will want the urn. After all, he is such a collector of cardboard boxes that his VCR or an electric fan came in. Will my ashes be fought over? Will they third me up so that one might have the ashes of my legs with their slight varicose veins, or my head or breasts? My younger son, who kept his bottle until he was 5, probably would get my breasts. No, I see my lover with these. He always admired them. Now he can have their ashes. Buy me a pretty black bra from Victoria's Secret catalog and throw it in. Take out the bra when he yearns for me. No, the ashes on the bra would mess up his place, and he hates all dust with a passion. No, I see him taking my ashes to the relief of both my sons, and especially their wives. I see him putting my ashes in a matching urn that he so carefully selected for his cat Kate. I see our twin urns on his mantle, my fate to be there next to this cat I was so allergic to in life, seeing some new lover of his in a jealous fit after he tearfully tells her how much he loved me after making love to her. This new lover spitefully moving these 2 urns on the bedroom mantle so that he is actually talking to the cat when he remembers me, and tenderly pats her urn and calls her Laura. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Lorraine Doran, who is born and raised in Wallington. She holds a JD and an MFA in poetry from New York University. She has been the recipient of a grant from the Jerome Foundation and an artist in residence at the Anderson Center for Interdisciplinary Studies. She is currently a language lecturer in the expository writing program at NYU with me. So let's welcome Lorraine.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. I got my start in poetry at Rutgers with a lot of help and inspiration from the wonderful Joe Weil, who you'll hear from later. But my New Jersey is Wallington, and I'm going to start with a series of short poems that are, I guess, visions of I came up with them by looking at all the places that I lived in Wallington on Google Earth, so they're satellite photos. It's called Satellite Photos of Our Former Homes. Legend. The way it works is you point at the earth with your little white arrow, then begin to fall toward it until you almost collide with the place you have chosen. Small colored dots appear on the landmarks you created, blue for water tower, yellow for stoplight, pink for the polished stone embedded in the sidewalk on Pleasant View Terrace. The way it works, you never really hit the ground, you sort of hover, remembering what the ground felt like, though you can tilt the earth if you need to get closer. From here, you can see my hometown is roughly heart-shaped because that is how the filthy river bends. Valentine heart, not fist heart, the sharp part pointing at where locust becomes main and the crooked line darkens because that is where the river scores the earth most deeply. 28 Adamson. When I have the dream about falling, it happens on these stairs, though in the dream there are more of them, and it is not so much falling down as it is flying over them. The red dot is a spark in the bathroom wall. After the first time your house burns, nothing is ever the same. Now you can see the future. The mind already sifts around its ashes. There are no souvenirs. Instead, you remember everything with its own small fire, like a good Zoroastrian. That way the burning is perpetual. I have 5 cylinders of asphalt from foreign highways, 11 moon snail shells from a closed for winter shore town, pieces of cities I have loved more than this one because they were not mine, not in the way these streets are mine. Because I might sleep through it next time, because it could happen while I am out, I am asking you, wherever you are, please save these things for me. 229. The street was called something like Hayworth or Hawthorne, except it wasn't a word you've heard before. We lived on the block between a tavern and the funeral home. It was busy between 4 and 7 every day between wakes. The red dot is the candy store I stole from the day I left for summer camp, where a girl named Tijuana taught me how to speak in the third person. Tijuana, don't drink no milk, she would say every morning at breakfast. That was the summer before the landlord died in my mother's arms as his wife shouted, "Do something." People are always shouting, "Do something," to my mother in the tone we use when there is nothing to be done. His wife said nothing for weeks after, except for his name. Tijuana, don't like where it came from. I'd never thought of it that way before. I'd never thought part of the self could be pared away, becoming something separate with its own name. 200 Mount Pleasant. This house is gone now. You are looking at a ghost house. I like not being at the mercy of the real, the absence. I like thinking there's this one dream everyone has. It makes me feel more human. Last night I had the dream about falling, and the night before that, the one where you hit the deer with your car. It always runs into the woods. You never know if it lived or died. Unless something breaks, you can't even tell it happened. The red dot near the rose bush is either the top of my head or my grandmother's Pekingese. I'm 7 years old, it is midday, and I am behaving myself. My dress remains clean, but I'm about to scrape my knee. I'm watching ants drag a monarch butterfly through the dirt. It takes hundreds of them. I wonder if it will bleed. I wonder if these are the same anthills my mother's brothers used to stick firecrackers into. They said it's no worse than what happens when it rains. This house had a piano in the basement right outside the bomb shelter, around the corner from the washing machine. It's amazing what water can do. Maybe someday I will teach myself to be cruel. Maybe ants get used to it, the perpetual building. But I am not yet imagining the future. I'm 7 years old, certain that when the floods come, this will be the last house standing. I'm going to finish with a poem that's in the book. It's based on a series of photographs that Deanne Arbus took near the end of her life in group homes for the developmentally disabled in New Jersey. Untitled. How to give a name to what exists now only as fragments. Bus stop, brown house, blonde nurse whose favorite phrase was, "Everyone dances in heaven." Soup spoon, small plane humming overhead, and my grandfather saying, "That's what I always wanted to do." Then retreating to the strange intermediate he lived in, where he smelled the pig farms the meadowlands used to be, where it was time to pour molasses over grain bought from the brewery and play Viennese waltzes to calm his cows for milking. The whole time listening for planes on their way from Newark or Teterboro. Just to fix them, he said, not even to fly. I used to think heaven was a lie we told the dying, another cloudy abstract not for us to decipher. It was not there in the fields of New Jersey that Arbus said I seemed to have discovered sunlight. The crop in her field was people, the strangest combination, she wrote, of grown-up and child I have ever seen. Parading on Easter and Halloween, wearing masks they made themselves, rolling on the grass in the aftermath of a somersault, clasping their handbags, each other, an apple, trying to save something for later. It was weeks after, the images still forming, when she knew she had seen the faces we are all making inside. Underneath, we are pure terror and joy. We are Anne Frank and Bob Dylan, exhausted starlets, all of us, superheroes, confused and wondering, was I the only one born? That must be what heaven is, an absence of worry about not knowing, not being more. Mostly we are alone, in a field with a storm blurring the background, a new season bearing down, everything and nothing changing. Sometimes the body goes on after the work is finished. More often, so much gets left undone. We have never danced together. Half sleep, hip bone carving your side, the wing of a tiny plane trying to fly out of you. Thank you.
Mark Hillringhouse is a poet, essayist, and photographer. He was the founding editor of the American Book Review. His poems and articles have appeared in American Poetry Review, American Poetry, Columbia, Hanging Loose, the Literary Review, the Little Magazine, New American Writing, the New Jersey Monthly, the New York Times Book Review, the Patterson Literary Review, and others. He has won the Chester H. Jones National Poetry Competition, 2 Pushcart Prizes, and several fellowships from the New Jersey State Council of the Arts. He teaches creative writing, is a member of the National Book Critics Circle, and the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation's Poetry Program. He is also an award-winning photographer with many exhibits and publications to his credit. And I'd like to thank Mark Hillringhouse and welcome him to the stage.
Thank you, Alicia. Nice to see you in person. All right. And Joe, nice to see you in person. Thank you. I want to thank Maria Gillen and the Poetry Center for hosting this, and Joe and Alicia for putting together this great anthology. I'm really pleased to be in here. You did a wonderful job. I'm going to read this. It's only a 3-page story. It's in the anthology. And it relates to a time that I was living 3 miles from here in Little Falls on the Passaic River. And someone introduced me to carp fishing. The story is called Carp. No one knows exactly when the first carp appeared in the Passaic, but the record stands at 60 pounds. Some old-timers will tell you about the great carp, a fish of maybe 3 times that size. A few say they've seen it surface. Some local fishermen swear they've hooked it, having seen their lines snap and their poles bend and break in two. Others claim to have had their rowboats capsized. Bill, my downstairs neighbor, in an old 2-family river house I rent, was the one who got me started fishing for carp. I was used to fishing for game fish, stripers, largemouth, trout. I never thought much of carp, but the longer I lived by the river, the more obsessed I became. The last time I was in the city, I walked through Chinatown and spotted these ceramic bowls and plates with hand-painted carp done in broad blue brushstrokes. The guy who owned the shop told me that his people worshiped carp, considered them messengers of the gods. In ancient Chinese painting, he explained, you often see a long, white-bearded sage cutting open the belly of a carp to pull out a scroll with sacred writing, because carp symbolize the soul on a spiritual journey. I bought the plates. Once, I even tried eating carp. I was so eager to taste it that I didn't bother to learn how to clean it properly, and spent 2 weeks in bed with a fever. I later found out that carp are supposed to be kept in a bathtub filled with clean water, like a giant goldfish, for 3 days before cooking. Bill got stoned every day. He grew pot in a hidden garden plot on the riverbank and would smoke out back on his dock. He smoked, fished, and drank. He used to build fires on the banks of the river, but the last time he did this, he nearly burned down the entire dock. I watched in horror from my living room window as the tiny fire quickly grew and began consuming the weathered 2x4 planks. It was January, the middle of the night, and there was Bill out on the ice, slipping and falling, shouting and laughing, and throwing burning sticks onto the ice to melt holes. I heard him shout something about wanting to ice fish, but he lost interest, fell asleep, and would have burned or frozen to death if I hadn't gone out, stomped the flames with my boot, and woke him up. Bill was with me, of course, the time I hooked a monster carp. "What the hell was that?" he shouted in disbelief as the pole and my good reel were ripped from my hands. I'd lost bait and tackle before to logs, rocks, refrigerators, washing machines, even car tires, but never to carp. Once I reeled in a chrome shopping cart covered in long green algae. Bill said it reminded him of the time a guy hauled a VW Beetle out of the river. They took it apart, put it back together, and got it running, he said. The sun had gone down, the bugs were bad, and the river stunk like algae. I lit a cigar while Bill lit a joint and popped a beer. "I'm going in to get my deep sea rig," I said. Bill liked the sound of this and smiled. "How many pound test?" 50 should do it, I said. I went inside and came out with my 10-foot deep sea fishing pole and tackle. I could catch a shark with this rig. I tied on a lead sinker and a treble hook and buried the hook in a fist-sized ball of Wonder Bread. I arched back to cast but got hung up in the branches. It was overgrown by the river and shady in summer, which I liked, but hard to cast. I saw Bill breaking the branch where I got tangled. A minute later, I was clear. "Now try," he said. I reached back and cast clear to the other side. "Ease up," he shouted. We were drawing onlookers, neighbors from both sides of the river. Some walked over to get a closer look. Many of them live in bungalows built as summer homes back in the 20s, when this section of river was a resort. Folks from Newark and Patterson spent the hot summers here on the water swimming and racing small sailboats. There used to be hotels, even an amusement park with rides further upstream in a section called Singac. All gone now, except the bungalows. The folks who live here love the river. I called them river billies. and I became one myself. They put up with floods, water damage, bugs, and bad smells. But the homes are cheap. In warm weather, powerboats race up and down, causing huge wakes to roll over the dock and splash the back of the house. There are kayaks, canoes, rafts, rowboats, even sailboats. A while back, there was a kid a couple 100 yards down who took shots at the river with his rifle, liked to shoot geese. I'd call the cops. He'd shoot in my windows. This went on all summer. But tonight I was hooked into something mysterious. There's something big out there, I overheard Bill saying to a neighbor. I let the sinker take the bait to the bottom. Carp are bottom feeders and feel for their food with their whiskers. They have the eyesight of bats but can smell like bloodhounds. I felt a slight tug but ignored it. You have to let a fish swallow the bait. With a deep sea rig, I sacrificed agility for strength, so I had to wait until I had a sure strike. The only fish I ever caught out here behind the house were catfish and carp. I always knew when I had a catfish because it felt like a leather shoe filled with mud. Carp are odd. Their first instinct is to go down and you have to pull them off the bottom. But sometimes they take off like game fish and break the surface. Their mouths are soft, sucker-like round holes that tear easily. They eat smelly dead things and algae, but they also seem to love Wonder Bread. In the evenings after work, I like to stand on the dock and cast handfuls onto the water to watch the carp feed. Bubbles rise, then the surface roils in a feeding frenzy. Their huge, green, scaly backs press together like hogs at a trough. When the bread is devoured, they slowly sink back down to the mud bottom and disappear. I imagine thousands of them lying on the bottom, sifting through the mud, foraging, camouflaged in the muddy green water like chameleons. An old riverbilly once told me that during the drought of the summer of '64, when the river nearly dried up, thousands of carp baked like worms in the hot mud. Some big ones too. One measured at 6 feet. There's a woman in Lower Wayne who swears a carp swallowed her poodle. Claims she saw her dog barking at the river one night, heard a loud watery belch, then silence, and no dog. Others have reported seeing ducks sucked under that never resurfaced. I angled my pole back and started to reel in, but the reel kept on spooling yards of 50-pound monofilament. I set the drag tighter and pulled back, hoping to break the action and take in the slack, but there was a loud snap. The line loosened and all the tension was gone. A good angler can land 1,000-pound fish on 50-pound test in the open water. I re-rigged the reel and pole, but this time I spliced the line with a steel leader. A group of kids on the other side of the river were shining their flashlights into the murkiness. I heard one kid yell, "Log." It was no log. It made a figure 8, ripple in the water, and bent my pole into a U before the line snapped. A couple of the riverbillies in their rowboats pointed their spotlights at the place where it had vanished. I reached into my tackle box and pulled out my biggest long-shank treble hook, secured it with a square knot to the steel leader, and rolled an entire loaf of Wonder Bread into a 1-pound dough ball. I buried the 3-pronged hook deep in the center of the bread ball and with one long cast landed the bait, and with a big splash right in the middle of the river. "Good cast," Bill said. I let it sink to the bottom and waited. The neighbors gathered into a crowd. They wanted to see whatever it was that could tear ocean tackle like silk thread. It was just after dark, a humid cicada chirp filled July night, and everything was still. They say carp are drawn to the moon. Maybe they think it's a giant dough ball. Everyone who lives on the river helps each other out during floods. They all have stories to tell about fighting the river. When I first moved here, the spring rain started and never seemed to stop. I watched the river rise, watched as an uprooted full-grown oak sailed by on its side, its huge branches spread out like the tall masts of a whaling schooner, taller than my roof. Later, Bill showed me the different flood water lines where the river had stained the back of the house. Just as Bill was waving his arms to quiet down the crowd, the line jerked violently and almost knocked me over. It did take Bill, though, because he had tangled himself up in it. Before he could undo himself, he got yanked down the slippery riverbank and into the river. A collective gasp escaped the riverbillies standing on the banks. I had the carp on the line, and the carp had Bill. About 100 feet upriver, his head bobbed up out of the water. He was laughing and screaming for me not to let go. The line was reeling off the spool so fast I could smell the friction burn. The river widened just past 2 bridges, where the Pompton joins the Passaic. I could see the outlines of all the sleepy bungalows crouched beneath huge willows in the moonlight. I could see the porch lights reflected on the river in dark stretches where there were no houses. The rear lots of warehouses and trucking companies. I could see the loading docks for the Wonder Bread warehouse under a streetlight. A desolate lot, parked bread vans lined up for the morning's delivery. The clouds were piling up in the night sky, the moon lost in a cover so thick that only the bright beams of utility lights could cut through the hot summer air. I heard a riverbilly on the opposite shore getting into his rowboat and pulling the starter rope on the outboard. I yelled over to him and waved my flashlight, signaling him to pull up to Bill's dock. With a small outboard engine, he came into the dock and I jumped in the bow. We took off slowly. I kept watch, shining a flashlight on the water so as not to ram the boat into the logs sticking up all over the river. We didn't have to go far. I spotted Bill holding onto a wet log protruding from the other side of the railroad trestle near the Pompton Turnpike Bridge. "Sorry, man," he said. "I had to let go after I got pulled under." I reached for him and grabbed him by the shoulders, pulled him sliding into the aluminum boat like a big mud salamander. He reeked of algae. The river muck loosened and let out an equally foul odor. "Let's go back," he said, "and have it again. I have a refrigerator full of stale, moldy Wonder Bread, my own special recipe." I was about to tell him no, that it was too late to keep fishing, that it would be better to wait until morning when the carp would be feeding again. But when I saw his grin, huge and visible, even beneath all that mud and grime on his face, I told him I was ready. Thank you.
Next up will be Joe Weil, and I just want to say something before I read his brief bio. When we were starting to put everything together and compile a list of the writers who should be in the anthology, every time we would contact somebody, they would say, "Oh, great, I'd love to be in it, but make sure Joe Weil is in it too." Do you know Joe Weil? Do you know Joe? And his name came up more than I think any other writer in the anthology. So you have a lot of followers and a lot of supporters, and we're now among them. So Joe Weil is a distinguished poet. He teaches at SUNY Binghamton. His newest collection of poetry is The Plumber's Apprentice. His earlier books are Painting the Christmas Trees and What Remains. Mr. Weil has been involved with the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation for many years as a Dodge poet in the schools and as a working leader in the foundation's Clearing the Spring, Tending the Fountain program. He teaches poetry in the schools throughout New Jersey through the Dodge Foundation and theater, and we're cut off, but I think that says it. And he's in What's Your Exit, so great. Joe Weil, please.
I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Lorraine for even mentioning me up here. And Mark, if you use half a potato half cooked, that works too for Mark. I know. So I'll start off with a poem all these are from Jersey, but this is about Patterson. I worked with kids here for about 14 years, thanks to Maria. And I had this church group or whatever in Cranford, and the guy said, "I want to visit you now that you moved to New York. I'll bring a couple of my nephews." And one of them was a kid I had taught here in Patterson. So this is for him, for Jordan, a kid from Patterson who visited my house. "We cart rocks from the flood wall to surround this fire, great heaving stones that make dents in the soft earth. These kids from a neighborhood of street gangs are afraid of the daddy longlegs in my shower. I swat and smush casually with my hand, killing all bugs, showing off for the boys. We sit down by the fire telling ghost stories bragging and laughing, risk getting ourselves burned, leaping over the flames. I haven't felt this alive in years. The older brother, Jordan, remembers his father, a dealer who got busted and sent up for 13 years. I say to him, he must have been top of the line. 13 years, shit, that ain't no punk time. He nods, yeah, we had a big house, 3 floors. But he wasn't like that, you know? And takes a stick to the hot coals and scrapes until they burst into flame. He tells me his dad smiled when he visited him in prison. His father's getting deported to Colombia as soon as his stretch is up. He wants to see his dad again, there on the coast where they ride white horses in the foam of the sea, where every rock has a story. His dark eyes stare at me through these flames. There are tears massing at the borders of his eyes. He's looking for a father anywhere. Me too. How fragile our bravado is. I teach him how to bob and weave, how to cut the ring. He wants to be a boxer, so I show him what my dad showed me, how to throw from the heel, no roundhouse. He wants to box and be a writer, he says now. When I give him my poems, he reads them through, long and carefully. Says with surprise, "You don't write like a white guy." This is my highest compliment. I know what he means. I tell him in my neighborhood, the Cuban grandmothers called me El Blanco. He picks up a marshmallow, the last one, and offers it to his little brother. He has valor, a good heart, and what will these do for him? A single beef and he might catch a bullet. The world is not particular in whom it chooses to slaughter. His father, he says, was different. He read books. He sang songs. He dealt dope because he wanted that house with 3 floors and no roaches, bug-free. No daddy long legs, a clean shower. When they go, the land seems to hold them for a few hours. The way a pool empty at dusk holds the afternoon's laughter, the sounds of splashing, the voices of kids horsing around until the dark drops down to silence it again. I clean out the ash from the fire. I too am an orphan upon this earth. El Blanco, the whitest motherfucker in my neighborhood. I say a prayer for him. I pray he gets those hooves in the foam of the sea. I pray he dodges every bullet. What the hell? What can a man do with a land where every stone tells a story? Listen, Shama, lost in these busy lives we think we lead, the mute, essential poverty, the true blood of stones and stars. And since Lorraine mentioned the filthy river, and Mark mentioned the filthy river, I'll mention mine. The river, Elizabeth River used to run pink in the summer because the Pepto-Bismol factory would release them. I mean, it was literally Pepto-Bismol pink. And it would light on fire, you know, because I used to like to scare people. I'd throw a match in the air, whatever. We used to hunt rats. They had carp too, but they glowed in the dark. They were filthy river. I live near a filthy river. I have always lived near a filthy river. And yet the nymphs climb the metal netting of half-submerged shopping carts to sing to me. What do they sing? Sometimes it's Palestrina, and sometimes Marvin Gaye. Often I tie myself to the mast of a ship so as to be seduced but not led away into death. Occasionally I listen and I drown. I drown in a filthy river. I have always drowned in a filthy river, to rise like Osiris with the dawn, to sink in this mud that I know is the source of all song. I would ask you to join me, but you swat your arms and complain about the mosquitoes. Let them bite. Draw blood. You will remember a song from your childhood, or the first good kiss, or the way light played on your legs the first time you knew they were pretty. Don't be afraid. I have made this poem for you to enter. Enter this river. The mud between your toes is your mother. The sun on your freckled back knows your name. Willow your hair and roots your limbs. Climb that netting of half-submerged shopping carts. Go ahead. Sing Palestrina or Marvin Gaye. Sing in the river until only the song remains. The great thing about New Jersey is its complete perspective by incongruity. At least the part of New Jersey I come from. On my block, there was a Yugoslavian ballerina, like a nutty guy that had once cut off the head of somebody in a revenge fight. He got out of prison. I mean, you just don't know what you're going to encounter. But the one thing that drew everybody together in my neighborhood was the lottery, when that finally came around, because people would buzz about it for days. So this poem's called In My Neighborhood, Everyone Almost Wins the Lottery, because everybody had a story about almost winning it, you know? And all the old ladies have these dream books. They have these dream books. They write down, but this goes like this. And the names are real in this, so. I changed a life, so I'm going to get sued someday, but anyway. There was Mrs. Spazzola, who dreamed the moon was following her late beloved husband, Patsy Spazzola, on his way to his old job. The one he'd lost before the tumor showed and finished him off. And she tried desperately to remember the exact address of his old factory, but got it wrong. And wouldn't you know, that was the pick 5 number that paid $100,000. And there was Jimmy the horse, the bookie with a sizable overbite, who rumor had it had won but kept the $1 million cash payout under his bed, which he set on fire, drunk on Johnny Walker Blue. When the fire went out, so did Jimmy, and all that was left of him were his gold-plated cufflinks and a couple of teeth. All around my neighborhood's misery, the right combinations hover and dance, whisper into ears of otherwise devout members of the holy name. When the pot's really big, Maya gives out free coffee at Lou's Luncheonette. The Botanica can't keep the African god saints' candles in stock. It's up to 85 mil, somebody says, half whispering. I don't need that much, someone else says. Shit, admits Wino Pete. Don't jinx me with that. I don't need that much modest bullshit. I'll take whatever them mothers can give. But no one ever wins. Everyone knows someone who would have won if only they had followed their hearts or remembered an address or been born on that lucky day. For a while, the block turns lively, almost festive, then sinks back into its perpetual decay. Cancer, layoffs, ancient rancors that explode when the mistress shows up at the funeral parlor too, when the strung-out junkie steals his mother's rings, whenever we realize almost only counts in horseshoes, and no one plays horseshoes on my street. Thank you.